This is Ross Coulthard, and you are listening to That UFO Podcast.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to That UFO Podcast. My name is Andy, and I am joined on my show today by a European advisor for the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies, former police officer, university lecturer. He has a master's in criminology and criminal psychology. He has also been a field investigator and UK Director for MUFON. I'd like to welcome to the podcast Lee Dines. Lee, welcome to the pod.
Hi, Andy. Thanks for the invite.
It's good to have you on, and finally we've been sitting talking now for 35 minutes before we've even managed to hit record due to some tech issues on StreamYard's behalf, and just before we were about to call it a day, it's finally let us in, Lee, so that's a sign it was meant to happen. And we've got a good bit of chatting done already, so I'm sure that'll stand us in really good stead. Lee, loads of ground to cover with you. Personally, it's a pleasure for me to speak to someone in the UK, recording at 4 o'clock in the afternoon when I can still have my whole evening ahead of me when we finish this. But no better way than to spend a Saturday than talking to you, Lee. So let's talk about first your own background for listeners or viewers who may not be sure who you are, what your background is. What's your kind of earliest interest in UFOs and what brought you to the dance?
So, Andy, I got interested when I was about 14 years old. I had always been interested in space and SETI, etc., and I had read quite extensively on that even as a child. However, for the UAP topic itself, it was actually, I was walking by a second-hand bookstore, and I saw a book by Richard Hall, who used to be with NICAP, and it was the UFO Evidence Volume 1. I got that book, and I was hooked. After I read that book, I read everything that I could on the subject. I subscribed to UFO magazine that used to be in the UK. There was the American and the UK version. I attended a lot of conferences, and I also actually started to contact researchers. Even when I was 14, 15, I'd email people like Richard Hall. They'd reply to me, they'd send me information, and that's how I got hooked on the topic. And this is the UFO Evidence Volume 1 from Richard Hall, and he subsequently produced Volume 2, UFO Evidence. Really good books, which I would recommend to anyone with regards to, especially if they're new to the topic, because it concentrates on evidential cases by pilots, sightings, radar cases, etc. After getting hooked on the subject, reading as much as I could, I subsequently joined MUFON, and I joined MUFON in, I believe it was 2003. So I was only about 18 when I joined MUFON. I subsequently did the field investigator's exam at MUFON, and I became a field investigator. And then a few years after that, I actually became the national director for MUFON. So we only had a small team in the UK, probably about 5 or 6 investigators, and we did what we could to investigate those cases. I subsequently, in 2000, I believe it was 2018, I joined the SCU. And soon after that, I was appointed to the European advisor for the SCU. I had knew people like Robert Powell. I had corresponded with him and Rich Hoffman prior to that as well. When I was involved with MUFON, as you know, both Rich and Robert were senior individuals within MUFON.
A lot of ground to cover there, thanks. And you must be similar ages to myself then, because I'm 38. So you're touching the same bases when you said 18 in 2003.
Yeah, I'm actually 1 year older, Andy, so I beat you just.
Yeah, you don't look it, but yeah, that's the life of podcasting for you. Ages you considerably. You were quite young though when you joined MUFON. What was the topic like in 2003 as, you know, a teenager, late teens, you know, early adulthood in the UK with an interest in the UFO topic? Was that something that you had to keep quiet, you felt?
Again, I hadn't had a sighting myself. It had all been through investigations when I eventually started at MUFON properly and was contacting individuals about their sightings. But prior to that, it had been from reading books, journal articles, and with the correspondence to other researchers. I didn't have any contact with, I've never had a sighting myself.
So what kind of work then? What were some of your highlights from that? 9 years at MUFON, from field investigation through to being the director? What were some of your highlights of that time?
It was actually not the sightings itself. There was some interesting sightings. A lot of it was anecdotal evidence, but we did have reports where individuals had seen had seen objects at close range, which were difficult to explain as prosaic objects, and there was some very good and interesting reports like that. I remember a close encounter case that we had from a nurse who was actually seen early in the morning hours, a large disc-shaped object actually from a bedroom window. She herself found it difficult to put in words to explain the experience to our investigators, but she was credible. We confirmed her identity, etc. With regards to her sight, and it either happened she was lying, or that she had some sort of physiological or psychological issue at that time, which hadn't happened prior, or as far as we know, after the event. But we had sightings like that, but a lot of it was anecdotal evidence where we didn't have photographic evidence or radar cases. Now, there are many such cases, but this was like the routine cases that we would often get at MUFON. We also, obviously, the vast majority of the cases that we investigated were misidentifications of prosaic objects, a natural phenomenon, for instance, Venus. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't understand what they're observing in the night sky. There's nothing wrong with that. These individuals were reporting their experiences, but the vast majority of cases we could explain.
So it would seem very obvious to say this, but your background, your master's in criminology, criminal psychology, your years in the police force, your investigation skills, was that something that came in handy when you were running your eye over UFO cases? Because like you say, I think there's a careful line to tread, isn't there, when someone has such a unique experience as to whether something has genuinely happened, or is there something going on in that person's life, that either a trauma or something other that has led to it manifesting in that way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it is. In my police investigation, I was a police officer for 9 years. My police training did assist me when I was doing investigations, and just when I was looking into UFO cases, generally UAP cases, it did help, especially with regards to interviewing witnesses, taking statements, writing reports, etc. It certainly did help, as did the educational qualifications as well. I did tend to stay away from abduction cases and similar cases to that, just because we didn't have the skills to appropriately deal with those sorts of cases. We would refer the individuals on to other investigators, other organisations. Dhowever, we generally, in the UK MUFON at the time when I was national director, although we'd certainly support individuals, we didn't actively investigate such cases, because if individuals have any trauma or associated aspects such as that, there needs to be a team around the person to support them. And I think that's really important for any investigative organization, to have that support for those individuals.
100% agree with that. And I think that's something to remember when anyone is either a genuine experiencer or claiming to have had that experience. It's important to separate, one, having an interest in the UFO topic and thinking, wow, this person may have been contacted by a non-human intelligence. They've had this incredible experience. They're talking about all sorts of things that, as someone with an interest in the UFO topic, excites you. But separate to that, there's a lot of very traumatic experiences come along with that. If you just mention, for example, Whitley Strieber, Whitley will talk about his rape at the hands of a non-human intelligence. So you have to understand that people are still going through something painful, traumatic, and there's an expertise, for example, someone like myself does not have to deal with, and a level of understanding, which it sounds like you had at the time, has to be levied towards that. And that's incredibly important for that person's, psychological well-being.
No, I agree completely, Andy. And even today, organisations that do provide and do investigate such cases need to ensure that they have those things in place to meet the needs of those individuals.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know, speaking to some folks like J. Christopher King at the Experiencer Group, they handle these things very delicately. And I know if anyone ever gets in touch with me, that tends to be the direction I point them. One, I'll happily listen to anyone's, story, or if they want to just get something off their chest. But for folks who have been through similar, or maybe know how to deal with it in a professional capacity, that, for example, is the kind of direction I send them. So that's completely fair. Just staying on the MUFON conversation for now then, before we move on to SCU, we talked about transferable skills, that investigative maybe nous you had, that natural ability. Talking about investigating UFOs or UAP at different levels, how difficult is it at a grassroots level, be it the UK, the US, wherever else, to investigate the UFO topic? So what does that look like? Is it an email someone sends in to say, I've had a sighting or I've seen something crash? And then what happens from there?
Well, I'll go through the MUFON perspective. So at MUFON, we had the case management system, CMS. So an individual would fill in a report, and quite a detailed report, objects, say, apparent size, color, description, as much details as we could with regards to what was observed. And then after that report was submitted, the state director, if it was in the US, or me as the national director in the UK, would review the case, and then we'd allocate to an investigator. Then the investigator would make contact with the witness. Generally, it was through email initially, and then they would attempt to contact them via telephone. And if it was a significant case, we would require the field investigator to actually interview the witness in person, and go to the scene of the incident as well. So it worked quite well in terms of an effective structure in assigning an investigator, etc. And then the field investigator should complete a detailed report with regards to the investigation, which again would be reviewed by the director, me, the national director in the UK, to ensure that the case file was appropriate, and it's covered all investigatory lines of inquiry. So that's how it worked with MUFON, and I believe it still generally works the same way.
Does an organization, and I've spoken to a few folks on the podcast who have been involved with MUFON, whether regionally, nationally, or at different levels, do you think an organization like that does have a ceiling of how much impact or influence it can have on the UFO topic? For example, do you ever foresee a situation where we get capital D disclosure from MUFON, or is it a case of it's an entry level place for your average person like myself to go and report a sighting and let someone take it from there?
Yeah, I get what you're saying. Yeah, the average person, a lot of the reports that we received at MUFON, members of the public, and they're reporting their encounters. There were reports by pilots and others, including scientists, to MUFON. The organisation I'm with SCU, SCU does much more research and analysis of cases and reports. MUFON collects a lot of reports, and the database is huge, consistent of thousands of reports. However, I found there wasn't actually much analysis. So yes, it's good to collect the data, but you have to analyze it to determine results. And that's what we are trying to do at SCU, the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies. And with SCU, there's a lot of engineers, scientists, academics, etc., who are able to do that analysis at quite a high level. But MUFON is an investigation. I would still always encourage individuals to submit their sightings to MUFON and other groups, because whatever, we want to have these sightings accounts. They're important. We can do some analysis with them. So I would always encourage people to report their UAP accounts.
I think that's a nice place. You've naturally segued into SCU then, and folks may have listened back to those interviews, Robert Powell more recently, Rich Hoffman before that. But if you could just give us an overview of what is SCU as an organisation, an entity, and then what's your role within it?
So the Scientific Coalition Coalition for UAP Studies is essentially a think tank, consists of scientists, engineers, academics, and other professionals involved in the UAP field. And essentially, SCU, the emphasis of SCU is analysis of cases. So in-depth investigation of significant cases and analysis of cases. For instance, the Nimitz case of 2004, SCU we're actually investigating that case prior to the New York Times article of December 2017. That's what SCU does. My role within SCU, I'm an advisor to the board, and I'm the European advisor. So I try to build contacts within Europe, with individuals that can support SCU. SCU is a non-profit, and we have an annual conference. Actually, just got back from America a few weeks ago at the recent SCU conference.
So is it fair to say, if we're looking at MUFON as one investigative body, which people are quite familiar with, I believe, especially if you've got some interest in the UFO topic, it's a grassroots organisation that collects civilian, for the most part, data, investigates it best it can. From there can maybe be a lack, I'm guessing, due to funding, resources, of ability to move things forward. With SCU, the emphasis is on that scientific side of things, collecting data, but then they've got the resources and the expertise within that through the folks involved to analyze that data and hopefully, again, push that forward another step to get some form of result. Would that be fair?
Yeah, that's fair, Andy. SCU, with regards to investigations of specific cases, will only get involved in cases if there's some sort of support and evidence. So, for instance, we've got radar data, if we do have photographs, if we do have video footage, etc. So we will look at individual cases in depth as long as there is other evidence supporting the witness account. Now, if we had a witness, say, there was in London, let's say we had like multiple witnesses observed an object there, certainly SCU would potentially look at that because there's multiple independent witnesses, etc. But generally, SCU is looking for further data. Yes, the witness accounts are important. It's anecdotal evidence, but it is important. However, we're primarily concentrating on cases where there's additional support and evidence, radar, video footage, etc.
What have some of your highlights been then? You've been with SCU for, is that 6 years now?
Yeah, I joined SCU in, I think it was about 2018. And not long after that, I was appointed European advisor. For health reasons, I did actually have to leave for a little while, but then I returned. The highlights for SCU, I think the main highlight is just actually meeting the individuals that are involved in SCU. These are individuals that are passionate about the subject and they want to bring their skills and experience to attempt to address the phenomenon. But the key things for SCU, when I review the case files, etc., and things like that, is just the investigations that have been conducted. I think the SCU monograph on the Nimitz case is an excellent example of how we should be conducting investigations. But there's many others. Robert Powell's just recently, with others, done a characterization project. So that was analysis of essentially cases where these are our best cases throughout various different UAP databases. And these are selected via a criteria. So the objects had to be close to the witnesses. They had to be illuminated via self-illumination or city lights, etc. The witnesses, there had to be at least one witness, at least two witnesses, or the witness was a professional such as a scientist, an engineer, etc. So you look at these research papers, etc., and SCU is actually doing the research and publishing papers that the UAP community probably hasn't previously done, or we've been criticized. Yes, there has been projects done in the past, but SCU is trying to take the lead on this and get this data freely available to everyone. I think that's really important as well. All of SCU's research is open to the public. Once the report is completed, it's published, but we don't just give the report, we give all the actual data as well. So with regards to the characterization project, which was a really interesting study, all of those cases that were used in that study are available to the public. So there was 301 cases identified, which seemed to be really, really good cases. You can probably say the witness either seen the object or they're lying, because the objects are seen at really close range and lots of other factors are taken into account. All of these cases are available to the public as well to look at themselves and come to their own opinions and conclusions. And that's the thing about SCU. Nothing's hidden. There's no costs. It's freely available to the public. The SCU produces the SCU Review, which is published every few months. Again, that's free. It's a newsletter / journal where there isn't any cost for anyone to access that material.
You've just been at the AAPC, haven't you? That was over in
Yeah.
Huntsville, Alabama, May 31st to June 2nd. I'm pretty sure I spoke to Robert Powell about that. And that was the Anomalous Aerospace Phenomena Conference. And the idea with that was bring scientists, government, academia together to better understand the UAP, unidentified aerial phenomena. Let's talk about that. What was that event like, and how important do you think events like that are going forward?
It's very important. So the event was in person, but it was also online. We get a lot of individuals that haven't previously been involved in the UAP topic at all attend that event. We get scientists, we get military personnel, etc., who have an interest, and they come build a network, and some of them eventually join SCU themselves. However, it's also an opportunity for SCU to demonstrate what research actually is going on within the organization itself. One of the really interesting projects is the database project that SCU is currently involved in. So essentially, the SCU are creating a database which will hopefully eventually consist of thousands of cases from a variety of other databases, which will be open to the public, whereby researchers and members of the public will be to do their own research via using this database. It's a really interesting project. But we also had, obviously, Ross Coldheart was our keynote.
Yep.
Kevin Knuth, Dr. Kevin Knuth, gave a really interesting presentation with regards to how the UAP topic is a scientific topic and should be of interest to scientists. Dr. Julia Mossbridge gave an overview of the UAP topic and taboo, and SCU itself provide an overview of several other projects that are going on. So I mentioned the database project, but there's also the Propulsion project. So all that is available. Eventually, in a few months, these will be available online as well.
Awesome. And you were invited to represent SCU at a conference in Brussels that was organised by a member of the European Parliament, Francisco Guerrero. I'd love to talk about that. And I believe I remember at the time speaking about it on a few pods, maybe a couple of the breakdown news updates. What are the level of conversations like at a European parliamentary level, you know, when they're organising a conference? And I know Francisco Guerrero himself has brought the topic up a couple of times at that level, which must be a brave thing to do, given the level of stigma still attached. What's it like trying to get into that conversation there?
It is difficult. However, the UAP Coalition of the Netherlands, which is an organization, they've done a lot of work with the EU to try to bring this topic forward, specifically looking at it from an air safety aspect, because that's a means to get in, isn't it? These objects are seen by pilots, they're seen by other aviation professionals. They are potentially a risk to air safety. However, I think the European Union, there's still a lot of skepticism. And when you look back at the European Union involvement in UAP, you can't actually see this. So everyone will probably be aware of the Belgian wave of UAP sightings in the late 80s, early 90s. There was actually a Belgian MP at the time who argued that the European Union should have a department that investigates UAP. There should be a committee that actually looks at the UAP for the European Union. Now, this actually wasn't voted through, unfortunately. There was some resistance, including at the time from British MEPs. However, what was the suggestion there was Japan, the French investigative agency who investigate UAP under CNES, which is the French equivalent to NASA, that they could have potentially received more funding, and that they could have took on investigating the UAP topic for all the European Union countries. However, essentially it was dropped. It wasn't successful. So I think this recent initiative is an attempt to get other MEPs interested in the topic. It's not, we need to move it from the stigma and show that we need funds to actually investigate UAP. But it is a topic that needs to be taken seriously by European countries. But there's still a lot of skepticism, and I found that when I was at the event. However, Francisco Guerrero was very accommodating, and the issue with regards to air safety does need to be addressed, because what occurs now if a pilot reports a UAP and believes it's a risk to the flight, they can't make a report. So that's all good. They make a report. There's an agency that might review the report. They'll see if they can ascertain what the object was. But then if they can't ascertain what the object was, nothing else is really done. It's put in a database. There isn't any analysis. What Guerrero was really saying is we need a database and we need actual analysis of these reports. We can't just see them all as individual reports. We need to look at them in total, see if there's any correlations, and actually try to get the bottom of what is occurring here. So I think it was a worthwhile endeavor. And it was also, I also found it very interesting just with, it gave me the opportunity to meet other UAP researchers from Europe. So for instance, I've been corresponding with European researchers for many years, but I was able to meet people like Eduardo Russo, who is from the Italian Center for UFO Studies, and other investigators, make those contacts, which is really important with my role in SCU. We want to work with these other organizations. We want to share data. We want to collaborate to try, I say, to resolve the UAP phenomenon. We're not going to resolve it, but to get more data so we can potentially form hypotheses to explain what is occurring.
There's a hell of a wall, though, I feel, to break down there, because what you've got is an MEP, or just even a politician at the European level, will just say, trying to entertain that UFO conversation. They've got that meeting, say 2 till 3, but 3 till 5 they're in a different room, different chamber, discussing the conflict, the war in Ukraine. They're discussing NATO. They're discussing looming issues with China, between Russia and the US. They're discussing all this other stuff. Do you feel there's still an element of this conversation resorts back to, yeah, a few hours ago I was talking to a few guys about flying saucers? And how do you get past that stigma? Because it's one thing to say, and it's generally across the whole UFO topic, we have to get past it. I feel outside of the US, it's particularly hard, and you'll know this being in the UK yourself, to get past that surface stigma of the topic.
I agree 100%, Andy. The stigma is still there, and it's still in the USA as well. I think it has alleviated in the USA, especially from the New York Times article in 2017. I think those and subsequent articles, and obviously the establishment of Arrow, etc., has led to some of the stigma going in the USA, but within Europe itself and the UK, it's still there. If there is interest in the press, it's generally tabloid press, and it's tongue-in-cheek with regards to generally the accounts, etc. So the only thing that I could suggest is that we just need to get the data to these individuals that are making these decisions, and it's really important that we get a push from academia to show that this is a topic that needs to be looked at properly. It needs to be investigated, and there is good evidence. Yes, there are a lot of anecdotal reports. However, we do have extremely good sightings where it's supported with radar data, where we've got photographs, videos, etc. That's what we need to do. The stigma is all to do with, the individual's been drinking, the drunk, etc. That still exists, and it is a huge issue. And we can only address that by actually getting the best data out there, the best reports, the best sightings, and making sure that people take notice of them.
So what's your hope then? Say you go back to similar type of conference in 2, 3, 4, 5 years' time. What realistically could that conversation then sound like?
Well, if we went back, I think a lot of this will. I think what actually occurs in the USA is actually highly pertinent to the European Union and actually the UK itself, because even when I was speaking to some individuals at the European Union, they were mentioning that the US had an investigative body. And for some of those individuals, I think it's let's see what comes out of the USA.
Mm.
Let's see the conclusions that they actually come to. And just going back historically, in the 1950s, when the UK government were investigating UAP or UFO at the time, you probably heard of the Flying Saucer Working Party. So this
Yeah.
was a group that was set up to investigate UAP in the United Kingdom from the Directorate of Scientific Intelligence. At the time, they primarily got their data from the USA. In the report that was finally published from the Flying Saucer Working Party was informed by Project Grudge, which was a really skeptical report, which later was actually called TRIPE, by a senior United States Air Force intelligence official. However, it did influence the thinking of the British with regards to the UAP topic, and
Yeah.
I think that is the risk. So that is why it's really important that we do ensure that we publish high quality research, which is open to everyone to access. Individuals might come to a different conclusion from the SCU, but as I've already stated, all the data is there. Anyone can go in, look at the report, and they can see if they're going to come to the same conclusion as SCU, or do they have a different opinion with regards to the data. And that's all we can do. But we need to try to get this. We need to try to get academia more interested, especially in the UK. There are some universities in the USA who are interested, and a few of them actually do courses on the UAP topic. They're generally short courses. However, it's still a start. The topics being talked about in campus. We need to get this throughout Europe, really, and we need to get more academic institutes involved. There are some, for instance, Germany has a university there that's doing a lot of research into UAP, and there are a few other institutions, but it's not significant. And if we're going to remove the stigma, that's what we need to do. We need to get more academics involved, but also as well, it's important to get politicians involved where we can speak to them and say this is a topic that is of interest to the public. I think sometimes they might actually think, well, are the public interested in this? We're involved in the UAP community or the UAP field, and it's important to us. But what does the general public think about the topic? I think most people would certainly be interested in it. It's not their be all. However, if these objects are real, which in my view they do appear to be, whatever they may be, I'm quite certain that there is a genuine UAP phenomenon. And I think most members of the public would certainly be interested in that. So getting politicians involved is really important as well.
I think you're right that the general public, just opinion, are ready to entertain the conversation, but they're almost waiting on permission to entertain it, to believe that it's real and worthy of debate and discussion. They need something or someone or a group in authority to come out and say, you know, this is real and here's why, this is genuine and here's why we should discuss it. All the academic and scientific groups right now, so even if we look at SCU, Sol Foundation, the Vasco Project, the Galileo Project, all relatively new in their embryonic stages comparatively to anything that's been going decades. They've got all this wealth of data, don't even call it evidence, just wealth of data, and really serious credentialed people willing to talk about the UFO topic is real. These are almost definitely something that aren't human or are from a non-human intelligence. The signs seem to point that way. But it only takes for every 50 or 100 really good reports, well done analyses, it takes one Project Grudge, one Arrow report to come out, and the mainstream media point at that and go, see, it's all balloons. and everything else just goes away. That must be a huge frustration, because it certainly is for me. Just off the back of that Arrow report that came out not long ago, I had one radio station here in the UK get in touch, and that was the direction of the conversation, was, how do you feel about this report coming out and saying, there's nothing to this? And I know you've done this before with Simon Holland. I had to do the same thing on this show and say, well, that's not correct. And actually, it wasn't the best report. But in today's society, you read the headline, Arrow report says it's all balloons. That's it. You move on, don't you?
Yeah, and just very quickly on the report, I will comment on the report just very briefly, Andy. It's not a good report. My job is in my job, I mark a lot of student assignments, dissertations, undergrad, and I've marked postgraduate as well. And if this was a student report, if I didn't fail it, it would certainly get a third class classification, because the data in the report is terrible. Now, there's minor things like getting the Arnold date wrong. So they say that the Kenneth Arnold sighting, I believe, was on the 23rd of June. It was the 24th, 1947. They make other minor mistakes as well. However, some of the reports, some of the mistakes are significant. For instance, they tried to argue that half of UAP sightings in the late 1950s and 60s were potentially caused by individuals observing spy planes, specifically the U-2, etc. There's absolutely no evidence for that. The U-2 traveled at 70,000 feet in altitude. The point of the U-2 was that people weren't able to see it. It didn't have a contrail, because it's 70,000 feet. There isn't the moisture there for that to occur. So the U-2, there's just no evidence that it accounted for many UAP sightings at all. And Dr. Bruce Maccabee actually did a report on this. It's available on his website. As you know, Dr. Maccabee recently passed away. However, he did an analysis many years ago where he actually looked at the UAP sightings from Project Blue Book and tried to determine if there was an increase in sightings after the U-2 started to fly, which I believe was in August 1955. Maccabee's analysis showed that he looked at the data from 6 months before the U-2 started operating and 6 months after. There was hardly any change in reports. Now, if the U-2 was responsible for a lot of these cases, then there should have been a significant increase. There wasn't. Over the 6 month period, I think there was an additional 10 reports. But again, that would equate to about 3%. But certainly all of them weren't due to the U-2. It's absolutely ridiculous, the argument. But Arrow probably didn't know that Maccabee had already done this analysis. It was a CIA report that was published several years previously, where it was the opinions of some individuals in the CIA that the U-2 and potentially some other spy aircraft could be being misperceived by members of the public. However, there is no evidence to support that 50% of cases are caused by U-2 sightings in other aircraft. Absolutely none. And there's many other issues in the report we won't go into because it's been covered in depth, but it's not a good report.
I know one of your real passions for this topic is that history, the historical aspect of the UFO topic. So let's talk about that. And I wonder, just blanket coverage at first, what mistakes do you think we can learn from that have been made in the past? Or, and conversely, thinking about those reports from the past, what can we still pay attention to, or what should we be paying attention to now?
I think the mistake from the past goes back to the taboo that this can't be. If you go back right away to the 1940s, 1950s, etc., there's observations there which are difficult to reconcile with any prosaic explanation. We have objects that are moving at high rates of speed. They're immediately stopping, then they're accelerating immediately. They're making ridiculous angular turns. And we've got documents on this from RAF pilots, from United States Air Force pilots, and actually many sightings were also supported with radar evidence. But it was the taboo. The actual individuals investigating these incidents couldn't believe what they were actually seeing. And because of this, they were like, well, we have to explain this. It can't be what it appears to be. So as you're aware, Andy, we'll just briefly talk about like early United States Air Force interest in this. We had Project Sign, which started in January of 1948. The science staff, when they analysed the cases, etc., in September of 1948, it's widely accepted that they came to the conclusion that the most likely hypothesis was the extraterrestrial visitation hypothesis. A report, the estimate of the situation, was written, and it went to Hoyt Vandenberg, which was the chief of staff, and it was rejected. Now, we do have good evidence that this report existed. Captain Edward Ruppelt seen the report, and he documents it in his book. I've actually got Captain Ruppelt's draft manuscript of the book, which is actually provides much more details on the actual estimate of the situation. And Dewey Fournier, who was the Pentagon project monitor major, he also observed the report and confirms its existence. G. Allen Hynek, the scientific advisor, also has commented extensively that the opinion of the Air Force at the time was probably that these objects were interplanetary. What occurred after that, though, is there was a disagreement. Again, Vandenberg couldn't accept the conclusion. It seems it was because there wasn't any physical evidence to support the assertions that were made. And then after that, when the project is eventually changed to Project Grudge, there's a very skeptical nature, because they can't accept what they're actually, that the reports can be what they seem to be. And although G. Allen Hynek is a significant person in UAP research and he should be respected, he was very instrumental originally during the Grudge report in debunking sightings, which had a significant impact on later United States Air Force officers that were looking into the UAP phenomenon. So Hynek, and he admits this later when he's published his book, like The UFO Experience, and others, that he was a debunker. This is what he was doing. And the reason for that is because they couldn't accept that what they were seeing could be real. How could you have an object that comes that's suddenly stopping in the air and then shooting off at thousands of miles per hour? This was a significant issue, and it's the same with the UK as well. All investigations that were set up in the 1950s, etc., they couldn't accept what the witnesses were stating, even when there was supporting evidence. Because at that time, obviously, you've got to remember, let's just say that I would say that a reasonable hypothesis for some UAP sightings that they could potentially be extraterrestrial. I don't think there's any issue with that, okay? Mm-hmm. However, at the time, obviously, there was the concerns with regards to they couldn't get here, you know, the distances involved, etc. Even if the science at the time just wasn't able to accept that. But there's an interesting report from May 26, 1952, and I think this is pertinent here, where you've got United States Air Force jet. This is over North Korea, where the pilot and the radar operator in the aircraft are asked to try to determine what an object is from air traffic radar, ground intercept radar in Korea. The jet goes to the area and they see a blue light, but they can't identify the light. They do about 6-7 passes to it and they don't detect it on their radar. They start to move away from the light, and then suddenly ground intercept radar say there's something on your tail. The radar operator turns, he sees something which he's not sure what it was, but he now actually gets it on his radar as well. So we've got two independent radars that are detecting this object. The object suddenly ascends and they lose lock. Now, when they did the analysis of the radar, the United States Air Force intelligence, they found that the object was traveling at, I believe, over 6,000 miles per hour, and the G-forces would have been 20 Gs. Now, in the official report, it points out that the G-force would have been 20 Gs or more, which obviously a human could not stand those that force of acceleration. However, in the report, it actually says it is the belief, because of the G-forces and the speed of the object, that the radar must have malfunctioned. However, the radar worked perfectly fine prior to the observation and after the observation. So essentially, they couldn't accept the evidence, although it was visually observed briefly. However, two independent radars also detected the object. But it's that belief, that mindset, that what the evidence seems to show, it just couldn't be. How could you have something that's traveling at 6,000 miles per hour in 1952 in 20 Gs? How could that occur? It's the same with the Nimitz case as well, where obviously the G forces there are much hundreds of Gs, and the accelerations is hundreds of thousands of miles per hour. And some people look at that and they just can't accept it. And I think that was a key issue with regards to the investigations into the UAP. Those that were involved in the investigation just couldn't accept the data that they were receiving. And to be fair, Andy, there's probably a lot of variables involved in that as well. Some people have religious beliefs whereby they might think that these things just couldn't exist from a religious perspective, etc.
Yeah.
So various reasons for that. But when you look into the history of the field, my view is it's that mindset. This can't be what it appears to be.
What do you think then where we are now? And I appreciate this is two folks from the UK here talking about the US side of things, but the US seems to have always led the way in the UFO UAP conversation. Right now in the States, we've got the US election on the horizon, which is taking up all the headlines and all the news around the world. But we still have potentially some progress happening with language trying to make its way into the NDAA and discuss a presidential review board potentially set up of economists, physicists, and whatnot, discussing how do we disclose, looking at the files. And the second aspect of that was going to be eminent domain, basically the government's ability to reclaim any and all UAP, UFO material held by anyone, which was really controversial. What's your take on what you see happening in the States and how, not the political side of things, we discussed that before we recorded and we're not going to go there, but how you think the UFO, state of play might play out?
Well, with regards to the National Defence Authorization Act, I was disappointed when the Schumer amendment didn't go through, in that we don't have the review board, etc. I am hopeful that there could still be the potentiality that some of that may still be introduced. However, it's not looking particularly likely. What I will say, Andy, is that there are a lot of individuals within the United States government and intelligence community that are absolutely convinced that UAP are real. And a high number of those individuals do believe that the United States government may actually be in possession of, some sort of evidential UAP material. And very senior people believe this, not just like people like David Grush. There are other individuals that are of this opinion. My opinion on crash retrievals, etc., I'm generally on the fence. However, what I would say that all such claims should be examined. It's certainly important that is done. However, with regards to the situation in the US at the moment, I think because of what's happening with regards to the election, just generally, and other things that are happening in the world, still got the Ukraine war, etc., that the UAP topic it isn't the priority for a lot of individuals or politicians, although certainly many of them do understand it is an important topic. There are other things that have potentially knocked it off its pedestal, which is understandable. But hopefully we will have some more information that is released. Like I say, with regards to disclosure, we use the word disclosure, but when you look back at UAP history, people were talking about this in the 1950s, like Donald Keyhoe. When I first got involved in this, go back to when I was reading books from the 90s, and later on, like people like Tim Good, Nick Redfern were talking about disclosure. I'm 100% certain there's additional information that the United States government could release and should release. But I've got to be honest, in my own opinion, I'm quite skeptical that there's going to be anything occurring soon. But obviously we have Lou Elizondo's book coming out soon, I believe, Andy.
Imminently.
Yes.
Pun on the title, yeah. August for the US release date, yep.
So that'll certainly be interesting. And I think the books that have been completed by George Knapp and Jim Lukaski, etc., are also very interesting. Some of the accounts within those books with regards to what the United States government may know. However, like I say, my own opinion is I'm remaining on the fence and just waiting to see actually what does come out.
Yeah, and I'll state now, and I believe I've said enough before that people should know this, and this is just my opinion. No book, and I include Luis Elizondo's, or no documentary, including James Fox, and I name those as two of the most anticipated, and I can't wait for them, will be disclosure in the way people would hope. I don't think that would ever come in the form of a book or a documentary. It would be on the news that night. That's what, disclosure, I think, would be in that sense. But what we will get is more credibility, more testimony, more anecdotes. Hopefully we get more data and evidence. And I think in the case of obviously Lou Elizondo's book, it fills in a few holes in the story that people might have still. And maybe we find out more of the background as to why what happened, and maybe give us some more threads to pull at along the way. But for me, I would be happy with that. But it's Lou's book, Lou's work, and everyone's kind of looking for different things out of it, aren't they? But I wonder, from that point of view, then for you, whether it's books, documentaries, organizations like MUFON, SCU, Sol, Stephen Greer's organizations, whatever you want to look at it, where are we most likely to get answers to the questions we have on the UFO phenomenon? What's most likely in the next 5 to 10 years to bear the most fruit?
I think organisations like SCU and other such organisations are really key with regards to showing people that these things do appear to have a reality. There are certainly objects that are unexplained. There is a genuine phenomenon. I don't think that we'd get anything like disclosure unless whatever is the cause of the UAP themselves displayed themselves. We laugh about like an object land on the White House lawn and things like that. I think it would really take a significant sighting to get more people interested in the topic. But again, I think SCU is really important, and other organisations, just to inform the public of what actually does exist with regards to the evidence of UAP. And what I will say, Andy, as someone who is interested in the history of the field, especially United States Air Force, early involvement, etc., people, yes, read books, read articles, etc., but look at the original material, go back into the Project Blue Book files and actually look at those case files and see what was going on. And even go back to, from a UK perspective, the Ministry of Defence has thousands of pages online now. A lot of it is correspondence and anecdotal reports. However, we do have excellent reports going back right from the 1950s. And I would argue that these reports are indicative of showing that there is objects operating with characteristics beyond those that were existed at the time. And you can see these reports just very, very briefly, just a couple. August 14th, 1950. You've probably heard of this one, Andy. This is Flight Lieutenant Stan Hubbard's encounter at Farnborough. So essentially, he's a flight lieutenant. He's a test pilot at Farnborough, which is a research and development institute, and very popular for the air show that occurs there. But this is back in 1950, and he observes an object come right over the airfield, low altitude, about 1,000 feet. It goes directly over his head, and it's a disc-shaped object at close range. He estimates it that was probably traveling about 700 to 1,000 miles per hour. There's no air displacement, sonic boom, anything like that. But he's seeing an object at extremely low altitude. It's making a humming, crackling noise. There was nothing like that if we're objective. There was no means of propulsion, no wings, nothing like that. About 2 weeks later, Hubbard actually sees another object, but this time he's with 5 other RAF pilots, test pilots. These are the best we have, these are our best pilots. They're at a tower, again in Farnborough. They see an object about 10 to 15 miles away. It looks to them like a disc about button size, like I said, about 10, 50 miles away. However, the object's moving erratically in the sky. It stops, and then it starts to do a fallen leaf-like motion, and then it falls up, and then it shoots off at tremendous speed. Again, what object in 1950 could stop, hover in the air, do a fallen leaf motion, then fall up, then again stop again, and then shoot off? What existed at the time? And there's other cases as well. When you look at these reports, which I have in depth and there's many others. The RAF Topcliffe case in 1952. Just very briefly again, RAF pilots there in North Yorkshire, because I think sometimes we don't talk about the UK cases as much as we should, because we have good history with regards to UAP, and we have very good sightings by competent individuals. So the Topcliffe incident, which is was a base in North Yorkshire, this occurred during Exercise Mainbrace, which was a big NATO operation that was going on at the time. And essentially, again, you've got an RAF crew at Topcliffe. They observe an object, a disc in the sky. They're actually watching a meteor jet that's about to land, and they see this object about 5 miles behind the object. And what the object do, it's moving along, then it suddenly stops. It does like a fallen leaf again. It stops, rotates on its own axis, and then just shoots off again. Now, the witnesses on that case said it was as fast as a shooting star. It was tremendous. Again, these are all RAF officers. This is 1952. What did we have in 1952 that could be going along, suddenly stops, rotates on its own axis, and then shoots off at what the witnesses described as faster than a shooting star, tremendous speed? We didn't really have anything like that, anything that can explain that. And there's dozens and dozens of such cases. Now, I'm not saying that this is proof that there's extraterrestrials, but what I am saying is that the evidence shows that there seems to have been objects operating in the atmosphere which have capabilities beyond technology that was available at the time. And I think when you look at these reports from the 40s, 50s, etc., the reason that they are interesting is because now we've got drones and we've got other aircraft that can perform significant maneuvers, capabilities, etc. But they didn't exist in the 1940s and they didn't exist in the 1950s. So I would encourage people, yes, read your books, do read journals, etc., but go back to the original documentation as much as you can. And actually, when you're looking through those documents and you're seeing the actual reports, and it's not just a summary in a book, you get a much more of appreciation of what was actually occurring at the time.
Yeah, no, spot on, Lee. I was going to ask, you've been wonderful with your time, and it's a nice place to leave it. I've got a couple of listener questions. Have you got 10 more minutes? And what we'll do is I'll stick that on the paid platforms as a little bit of a bonus for the rest of the listeners, yeah?
Yeah, it's fine.
Awesome. Yep. Well, Lee, for this part then, for everyone on the free feeds, thank you very much, Lee. It's a Saturday afternoon. You've spent your time with me. The Euros are well underway as well for us in the UK, and we've all got a vested interest in the football. So thank you very much. If anyone does want to check out the work Lee and the team at SCU have been doing, the link is in the description, and it is explorescu.org. But Lee, stick with us. If anyone's on the paid platforms or wants to join up, you'll hear a few more minutes of Lee answering some questions that were sent over as well. That is all for this episode. Thank you very much for tuning in. Don't forget to leave the podcast a review on your chosen platform. Apple and Spotify do make a huge difference to the algorithm. If you're checking the show out on YouTube, please don't forget to like and leave a comment on here as well. Any sharing you do is very much appreciated on any social media platform. And finally, you can listen to shows ad-free and sponsor-free in their glorious full versions by subscribing for less than the price of a coffee on Apple, Spotify. Just search That UFO Podcast Premium. YouTube, you can sign up and be a member, or you can do that through patreon.com. Thank you very much for listening, folks.
It wasn't a tic-tac and not quite a saucer, more like a hubcap designed by Chaucer, a little baroque and quite steampunk, like Alice was playing bass for the Parliament of Folk. The little fucker hovered right outside of my window, and when I shoved out the screen, he made it an issue. I don't think he expected me to see his ass, but I'd had some champagne and